Layla, it is great to have you on the Sakara Life podcast.
Yay, I'm super happy to be here.
We start every podcast with the same question, which is, what is your mission here on Earth? What are you here to do?
My mission here on earth is for human beings to fall fully, unconditionally in love with themselves. And for me, that really starts with falling in love with their sexuality and remembering that sexuality can be a sacred act, that sexuality isn't dirty or wrong or bad the way that a lot of us got taught in culture or through religion sometimes, or just subtly just picked up in the field, that sex can be one of the most beautiful, sacred, holy acts available to us. And that being able to experience that starts with falling back in love with our bodies. So many of us are alienated, ashamed, disconnected from our bodies, where this is the one thing that will be with you your entire life. So part of my mission is that people can be super proud. Women are proud to have pussies. Men are proud of their cocks, that it's literally like, yes, this is beautiful. This is wondrous. And from there, that people restore their sexual sovereignty and spiritual power. All of us are mystics. All of us are capable of spiritual wisdom and spiritual activation. And because we've disconnected from our sexual power and energy, a lot of the time I found we don't have the fuel to activate our nervous system into the highest states of mystical communion with divine wisdom. And so I love not only as my mission that I restore people's sexual goodness, but I also show them and invite them to find the map inside themselves where their sexual power restores their heart power, their creative power, and then eventually their spiritual sovereignty.
It's quite a mission.
Oh, and I want everyone to be able to have a mind-blowing energy orgasm and know how to do sex magic. All those things.
Just throw that in there too.
How did you come to this work? Like, were you born kind of understanding this, or did you have to learn it the hard way, or like, how did this work find you, or you find it?
So it was both. In terms of my human experience, I learned it the hardest way. So my biological father was sexually abusive, physically abusive. So I experienced just a ton of trauma. He was cheating on my mom while she was pregnant with me. He then left the family very, very early. So much just complex PTSD, shame around my sexuality. I was also raised deeply Catholic. And while I believe that Christianity can have incredibly beautiful teachings, the sex negativity and the shame towards women, not only was it not part of the original religious tradition, but that part can be incredibly toxic. So I grew up hating my body. I actually used to pray every single day to God that please don't ever turn me into a woman. I couldn't imagine a worse fate. And I was so traumatized around sexuality. I couldn't even walk into a Victoria's Secret store at the mall when I was a teenager. Like when all my teenage girlfriends were like starting to get excited and wanting to kiss other boys or other girls, right? It was like, I was like, oh God, a bra. Like I was so frozen around sexuality, which I didn't even understand was a trauma response at the time. But along with that, I also had this very deep inclination towards my Dharma. And when I was 14, I found a trip in the back of the New York Times. I told my Catholic white parents in Colorado, my mom, my stepdad, I was like, you have to send me to Asia. And they were like, what? And I was like, I have to go. And they were like, okay, if you get straight A's, you can go to Asia next summer. And I was like, yes. So I got to go to, I was very blessed on this to Tibet, India, and Nepal when I was 15. And so I had this very early exposure to meditation and the Eastern traditions. And one of the first places I went was Kashmir, which is the birthplace of Kashmir Shaivism, one of the most articulated, powerful tantric traditions in the Indian lineage. And so very early, I had this calling towards Tantra and this spiritual path. And that kind of started me on my journey. And so it was obviously a tremendous amount of healing to not only love my body, love being a woman, but to feel comfortable, like to have an orgasm at first was like a huge accomplishment, let alone to have an energy orgasm. And so the gift of my trauma in this regard is because I had to basically dig myself out of one of the deepest holes a human can find them itself in terms of trauma and sexuality. I learned every step of the way how much all of our current sexuality, whether we were abused or not, whether we had overt trauma or not, is very defined by pain body and trauma. Because even something like slut shaming is a trauma inside of us as women. And so many of us are walking around thinking, I don't have a better orgasm, I don't feel more during sex because there's something wrong with me or I'm not that sexual. And actually, it's these very subtle trauma fields, even religious trauma fields, that can be healed and integrated so that we can all be these sexual beings that we desire to be.
And you talk about this idea of empowerment through sexuality, which it sounds like was a big part of your journey. What does that mean? Can you kind of dissect that and help us understand what you mean when you say that?
Yeah. So part of sexual empowerment is learning to love our sexual experience. It sounds simple, but so many of us carry so much shame around our bodies. Can I say pussy on this podcast? Is that
Yeah,
Sure,
totally.
okay?
yeah.
Great. Yeah. So I remember the first time I saw my pussy, I was like, oh, it's so ugly, right? Like, and it's got hair in all the wrong places. And like, who could ever love that? Right. So part of sexual disempowerment is rejection of our bodies, right? Or thinking that I only deserve sexuality if I'm like perfect somehow, or my body is a perfect shape, or I am a certain age, right? So part of sexual empowerment is reclaiming that we are all sexual beings, we all deserve pleasure, and we can all be sexual and desirable by other people on this planet at every stage in our life, at every shape of our body, and that actually our bodies are super beautiful. And you can learn to fall in love with your pussy, fall in love with your cock, fall in love with your intersex genitals. So that's like a basic stage one. Another part of sexual empowerment is this happens to all of us, and it can very much happen to women, which is sex isn't an experience for me. Sex is something I trade to get something else that I want. So for a lot of us, right, I don't feel lovable. So I'll perform sex so that I'm attractive and someone loves me. Or I don't feel inherently worthy of being treated well in my partnership. So I'll trade sex in the hopes that I'm treated well or I'm, celebrated or whatever it is. Men do it in a different way, which is I don't feel worthy. So I'm going to collect like sexual trophies, or I don't feel lovable. So I'm going to try and perform all the time so that I feel wanted or desirable. So part of sexual empowerment is to actually find all of those places. And this is where sexuality and the spiritual path become one, where you're telling yourself this fundamental lie: I'm not lovable enough. I'm not worthy enough. I'm not good enough. So I'm going to use sex to try and give those things to myself. And when you trace those hooks all the way back inside yourself, there's this opportunity to actually reprogram and re-imprint yourself to say, you know what? I actually am worthy. Like I'm worthy whether any man ever wants me or not. And I didn't learn that until like a few years ago. Because even in teaching all this work, right? Like I got way sexually liberated before I knew my own worthiness. Like I could have a magical mind-blowing orgasm before I stopped begging men for crumbs, right? Like just like being like, oh my God, please tell me that I'm okay. Please tell me that I'm good enough. And it was kind of amazing to me. I left an 8.5-year relationship and I thought I was really sexually empowered. And I found myself behaving in these ways where it was like, oh my God, please text me back so I could feel okay about myself. And I was like, shit, we got to do more work. Like there is more work to be done here. So I underwent like an even deeper process of choosing myself, of waking up every morning and affirming my worth, doing this thing that I call putting your crown on, where you feel your energetic crown. And like, I am a queen, regardless of what any man thinks, regardless of if anybody is attracted to me, living that day in and day out. Now, once you do that, sex takes on a different meaning, because if you're not trading it to feel a certain way about yourself, then why would you do it? You do it because it's an art form. It's an expression of your being. And so sexual empowerment starts to happen when you switch this idea that I'm doing it for some other reason to I'm doing it for myself because nature made me sexy. And how do I want to make this sexual art with someone that I love, right? How do I want to make this sexual art with someone who deserves to dance with me? And when we think of sex in that way, we become these sexual artists. And it's this felt experience of I'm not doing it anymore to show off, to perform, to exchange something. I'm doing it because it's me, because it's an expression of me, because it's something that I want to experience in this sacred body before I die. And the last piece of sexual empowerment, it is an energy piece. So when we became systematically sexually repressed, we also lost so much of our life force energy because in the Taoist and in the tantric systems, your sexual energy is an essential life force that's meant to pulsate upwards through you. And as it pulsates upwards through you, it actually empowers all your other energy systems. So being sexually powerful and empowered actually holds and supports your heart, right? You actually get this ability to love because we all know to truly love the world and to truly love others and to truly love ourselves, it takes a kind of power. It's not just like a soft thing. And that sexual power also blossoms our third eye, our crown, our spiritual abilities. And so part of sexual empowerment is no longer leaking our sexual energy, pushing it out, repressing it, judging it, but harnessing it, bringing it up and in. And what I found is that it is actually not normal for us to be chronically exhausted, to feel super unworthy, to feel disconnected from spirituality and mystical experiences. We were made to feel worthy and energetic and mystical. And so when we change this leaking of sexual energy from pushing down and out to coming up and in, it empowers our energy system. So you can think of a tantric energy sexual practice as like hatha yoga on steroids, right? Like whatever you could do in hatha yoga to your chakras, you can do it 10, 20 times faster and more powerful through a sacred sexuality practice.
I think
Wow.
I think one of the things you said about sexuality as a form of expression is really important. I saw this quote like a while back, but it was like the opposite of depression is not joy and happiness, it's expression. And so I've been thinking a lot about that through aspects of my life of like, am I expressed here? Am I fully expressed here? Where am I holding back? And so it's a really interesting lens to take on sexuality as well. And so how do you think about, you're talking about loving yourself, you're talking about, really honoring yourself, putting on the crown. Like, how do you get from where I'd say most people are right now, full of shame, full of self-doubt, to that place where you're like fully putting the crown on yourself?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the fundamental practice of sacred sexuality and of this process is what I call a pleasure practice. So, just like if you're going to do yoga, your fundamental practice is what happens on the mat, and you have an actual yoga practice. If you want to learn meditation, you sit and you do meditation for a certain period of time. So, this is like any other tradition. We're just fairly unfamiliar with what the practice is. So, I call it a pleasure practice. And so what you do is you take anywhere, it can be as short as 5 minutes to like, if you want to power through this, right? You can do an hour. I rarely do a full hour, but I do hours sometimes. And in this, you give yourself the opportunity to change your sexual conditioning, right? So most of us are full of shame because that's how we learned to treat our bodies, to regard our bodies, to talk to our bodies. And as all of you know listening, because you've been doing personal development, you've been doing spirituality, you know that things don't change without an intentional practice to shift them. What's happening is most of us have never put ourselves in any kind of experience where the point is to fall in love with your pussy, right? Where the point is to actually be able to release that stuck conditioning. So something like shame, there's a couple of simple practices. So one would be, let's say you're going to do a 15-minute self-pleasure practice. Now, the moment that you start to feel shame, right? Like a lot of us feel shame around self-pleasure. And I had this goal where I was like, I want to be so shameless around self-pleasure that like if someone walked in on me, I'd be like, yeah, instead of like, oh my God, right? And like if my partner walked in, we'd like high five, like that. And even for me, like that was a big step, right? To get all the way to this place where I'd be like, yeah. Same way, like if someone walked in on you drinking a green juice, you'd have this moment of like, yeah, look, I'm like drinking, I'm doing something good for me, right?
Totally.
And like with self-pleasure, we're like, ah. So as you like, let's say we're going to start touching yourself during a self-pleasure practice, the moment that you start to feel shame, right? Part of the approach in these traditions and these teachings is to actually move towards the shame and to love it. And that part of you that carries so much shame around your sexuality, most of the time we hold layers of shame in our bodies and in our energy fields as a protective mechanism. If I feel ashamed of something, I'm not going to go there. So if the world taught me that if I were to be slutty or if I were to be too sexy or if I were to be sexually powerful, right? No one would want to marry me. I'd go crazy. I'd get like 12 STDs, right? Or like spiritually, should I become like a powerful sex witch, right? What did we get told? You're going to live out in the woods by yourself and eat babies, right? Good luck. And so listening to the part of us that took on that narrative and decided it's not safe to be sexual in this society. It's not safe to love my body in this society. So I'm going to feel shame instead, because if I feel shame, shame is a signal, an emotional signal that says, don't go there. Right. So what's happened is most of us have taken on shame and kept it in place because we don't feel safe to experience our own pleasure, to experience the depth of our own sexuality. And so I like a practice that I call I eat shame for breakfast, which means that shame no longer scares me. Like, give me a whole bowl of it and like I'll just eat it up, right? Because as long as shame is an emotional signal that tells you not to go there, you will have so many protective barriers inside of you, especially as a woman, that tell you don't do something that society told you was unsafe. So we'll feel so ashamed of like saying the wrong thing, doing the wrong thing, the way our pussy smells, right? If we're like, my stomach looks weird when I'm like doing something sexual, like all of this is actually a hidden way that we took on to protect ourselves from our fullest power. Because when you just express yourself and you're not worried what everybody else thinks, there's a power to that. So understanding shame as the secret way to keep us from our full power allows in this practice for me to love my shame, to thank it, to understand what its role was. And what I will ask it is, what are you protecting me from? And when it will tell me, like, I got raised to believe that self pleasure was really bad and shameful. I got punished for doing it, right? Being raised Catholic, like little girls should not do this. And so I will usually hear some kind of message from my shame of like, it's not safe to feel your full pleasure. And so I'll thank my shame, I'll love it. And then I'll show it that I'm not a little girl anymore, that actually it is safe to feel my pleasure. And in fact, I'm even more safe now living a life of pleasure than I am living a life of shame. And usually, if I walk myself through that process, I let myself somatically feel the shame without running away from it, meaning I'll breathe into it. I'll let myself feel it. I'll get comfortable with the experience of it so it no longer blocks me. Then what happens is I'll usually unlock the part that was being protected by the shame. It starts to flow through you. And this is accelerated if you're doing this during self pleasure, because when you self pleasure, it amplifies and opens your nervous system. So that personal development work actually goes faster than if you do it when you're not in an altered state. It's like an endogenous form of taking a psychedelic and fast tracking your transformation. So, in that, usually a part of my pleasure that's being hidden behind a wall of shame will then restore. And then I can actually play in my pleasure practice with this restored experience of pleasure. The energy that was once being used to lock down my pleasure with a wall of shame through that process of healing and integration restores into my system. I gain more energy. My pleasure is going to be more intense. I'll probably have a better orgasm. I'll fall more in love with myself. And this is just one teeny example of what could happen in a 15-minute practice. If you do that over time and work with all these fields, fear and disgust and, alienation, like all of these experiences, and slowly over time, you get your energy back, you get your body back, your orgasms become far more powerful, and your pleasure becomes much more intense. but it's counterintuitive because we're trained to believe that sex and self-pleasure should only be about pleasure. And in fact, I've thought of pleasure practice as even the best word for it because you're experiencing so much more than pleasure. But the idea is to restore your pleasure ultimately. But the thing that most people don't understand is it requires going through those fields of pain or fear or shame, integrating them step by step to restore our sexual wholeness.
And so it starts with yourself. It starts with working on yourself. It starts with your own self practice. And then how do you start to integrate that then into a partnership? How do you know when you're ready? Like, I'm sure that that could be scary if you've been working on yourself to then take that next step, or maybe if you've been out of a sexual relationship for a while, or you might even be in a relationship but not having a sexual relationship. How do you then take that next step to get back in?
Absolutely. So, yes, starting with yourself is really important because doing those kinds of practices with a partner, if you're new to them, it's just going to be overwhelming. I liken it to trying to play doubles tennis if you've never used a tennis racket before. It's going to be like, what is happening? Right. So, getting comfortable with yourself first and foremost is really, really, really important. Then what happens is that if you're not in partnership, one of the things that I've seen is like when you open your heart, you attract more open hearted people, right? When you clear your energy field, you attract clearer people into your life. When you fall in love with your sexuality and you become empowered and you're not using it to amplify your egoic delusion anymore, you start attracting those kinds of people, right? Like if I'm really focused on using my sexuality in a kind of hungry ghost ego way, I'm going to attract other people who are doing that as well. Like it's not always that linear, but there is a correlation to that. So when you do this work, you change your own energy field, and it's amazing the kind of people who actually show up, who are magnetized to someone who, once you do this kind of work, you dance different, right? Your energy flows differently through your body. The way that you express yourself is different. And so who is going to look at that and be like, wow, like that's who I want to make art with. Like that's who I would be honored to have in my life, right? That is really, 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 it's hard to explain the magnitude of that shift and who comes into your life when you have that. Now, the other thing is, I think a lot of, I'll speak for women, think that, oh, if I were to do that kind of sexual work, I would be seen just more as a sexual object. What I've seen over and over again in myself and like literally hundreds of thousands of women that I've worked with over almost 20 years is that when we are being sexually performative and saying, I will trade sexuality with you so you make me feel chosen or loved or wanted, we attract a partner who actually is going to use us more as a sexual object. And men are not stupid. We tend to think of them as being dumb. They're not. They know who is wife material and they know who is hookup material and they know who is situationship material, right? And they will act accordingly. If you are using your sexuality as your primary hook, you're going to hook people who are looking for sexuality as a primary hook. When you do this deeper sexual work, you come alive. You become far more empowered. I was actually, this is kind of funny, like when I became single in my mid 30s and I wanted to just be single for a little while. Like I wanted some like high quality lovers. Every single person I dated, even on apps, was like, no, you're wife material. Like I want to go deep with you. Like I want to have a partnership with you. And I was like, stop. Like I just want to have a lovership, right? And I only tell that story because I think a lot of us say, if I were to do sexual work, I would get more sexual attention and I want to be chosen. Like I want to be deeply valued. I want someone to want to form partnership with me of any gender. What I found is that men recognize women who are wild and powerful and true and in themselves and have an open heart as partnership material. And I don't think a lot of us realize that by not doing the sexual work, we're actually keeping our sexual wounding in place. And just like if you don't do the heart work and you have a lot of heart wounding in place, that's going to interfere with your ability to form long-term partnership. A lot of sexual wounding will interfere with that as well. And so, doing the sexual work actually counterintuitively, because a lot of what we've been programmed to believe is that doing sexual work would not make you chosen, actually prepares you for a much higher quality partnership. When you have that kind of sexual power flowing through you, you also have boundaries. You start to know your worth. Even for me, I told you, right? I like started doing this sexual energetic process, and it took me a long time to finally know how worthy I am, independent of men, but also how worthy I am as a partner. And that energy could only be pulsating up in me for so long before I had to learn that about myself. So that's one of the powers of doing this if you're single. And in partnership, I found that it can go three different ways. So the first way that everybody's afraid of is actually the least common way, which is I start doing this work and my partner is like a strong no. And like 5 years later, we break up because I'm like, yo, I want to have all these magical cosmic energy orgasms. And you're still maybe like watching porn all the time. And that's a fundamental mismatch. And this is a fear that I think everyone faces on the spiritual path if they're in a long term partnership and their partner isn't fully joining them, right? If I start eating healthy and my partner's still eating whatever Pringles, are we going to break up? If I quit drinking alcohol and my partner still wants to get drunk all the time, are we going to break up? If I start meditating, my partner never wants to meditate, what's going to happen? More often than not, what I see, especially in the sexual realm, is that when you start doing these practices, your partner, especially if you explain it to them, hey, I'm going to do this work because I want to have the best sexual experiences with you. And here's all the things that are amazing about our sex life. And I'd love it to be even better. Right. And here's the thing, a lot of us, especially men, but everyone can have this opinion. It's like, if it's not broke, why would you fix it? And like, if you're going and working on your sex life, does that mean there's something wrong? But again, this is the misunderstanding of our culture. Because if you started going to the gym and eating healthy, nobody would be like, oh, there must be something wrong with you. Like, you'd be like, no, I want to have the best life ever. So I'm going to go to the gym and eat healthy. If I want to have the best sex life ever, I'm going to get myself a pleasure practice and start doing sacred sexuality work. Right. So I actually see that 80% of the time, your partner is like, what is happening? And eventually, like, I want to learn this too. Like, this is really exciting. Like, you're more alive in the bedroom. Like, you're having more amazing orgasmic experiences. I totally want to join you in this. And they start learning. And then you start doing the partner practices together, which are some of the most amazing, beautiful experiences that any couple can have. Like, we're just scratching the surface of the kind of sex that's possible. So when you start having that kind of sex in your partnership, it fundamentally changes the game of what's possible in partnership. And then finally, the last percentage that I see is one member of the party becomes like a full-blown like sex priestess, and the other one's just like doing their thing, and they still have a great time. And the other person doesn't necessarily need to be the sex priestess. So I've seen like, yes, sometimes like 10% of the time it produces a breakup, but only if that's true. 10% of the time it's like, hey, I like massively expand. My partner never comes along and we're happy. I actually just worked with a married couple in my tantric mastermind that for 25 years, she had done all the work and he never did. And he was a rock and they were really in love. And her world was a mystery to him. And they fell so madly in love. And he finally like joined her and they had their awakening, right? It was so powerful. And they were more in love than ever after 25 years. So you never know what can happen. And sometimes couples decide to do it together. Like, I'll do my solo practice, you do your solo practice for 6 months, and then we'll come together and we'll start learning a couples practice. And that can be really beautiful.
I was going to take us in another direction, but this just made me think when you said that, like, do you recommend pleasure practices for men as well? Because that's not something I hear as often. Like, I hear pleasure practice for women a lot, but I don't really hear it for men. And I think there's actually shame around it for men because of what a man might typically reach for, like porn or something like that.
Yeah, or
Totally.
especially if they're doing a pleasure practice without porn, I feel like there's even some shame for men around that, that like they're not, manly enough or something.
Totally. So my experience is that there's nothing like inherently morally good or bad or right or wrong about watching porn, other than the fact that a lot of the way it's made is very damaging, especially to the women who engage in it. Not all of it, but some of it. But beyond that, porn really hijacks men's sexual brains. And we have this misperception in our culture that women are really damaged sexually and men are totally fine.
Mm.
And what I found in all of my work is that men are even more disconnected from their sexual power. And that as much as women got repressed under patriarchy, men got just as alienated. We forgot that we were goddesses and they forgot that they were gods. We actually forgot together. And that men also got fed this toxic lie that they had to dehumanize others, that they had to take over the world, that their sexuality was taking from someone, that they'd be like happier with a virgin than with a full badass queen, right? I love my friend the other day because I said something about like, that like virgins in heaven or whatever. I was like, you'll get 72 virgins in heaven. He was like, fuck 72 virgins in heaven. Give me two sluts who know what they're doing. And like, it was like, so all of these like the sexual brainwashing has hit men super deeply. And men have just as powerful and potent a sexuality as women do. Men can be fully multi-orgasmic. Men can be so deep in their bodies, and men can have just as potent of mystical experiences as women can sexually. So men have been pushed very often into parts of their prefrontal cortex through fantasizing and also through making visualizing rather than presence the main way that they experience sexual pleasure. So every single time you have an orgasm, you're actually strengthening your nervous system's ability and desire to have an orgasm in that exact way. And so for men, if you've watched porn over and over and over again, well, there's nothing to be ashamed of in that. It has an impact on your nervous system. Your nervous system is then going to have a harder time having full blown, wild, embodied sex with a living partner. And so, what a pleasure practice can do for men is it can do the same process of de-shaming, destigmatizing, releasing alienation, releasing disconnection. Most men have never received cock worship in their entire life. I actually see that right now in certain circles, kind of what I think you're alluding to, Daniela, is like the like it's more okay to worship a pussy than it is to worship a cock. And
Totally.
like everybody's genitalia is actually holy, right? So a big part of what I do with men is retrain them to love their bodies, to understand their gift, the gift that is their sexuality. And then, yes, to absolutely have a pleasure practice. So to self-pleasure without porn, to self-pleasure and to combine that with masturbation, to meditation, also masturbation, but meditation, to self-pleasure, and then to start learning the basic energy practices, right? To do microcosmic orbit, to combine breath work. And for men, this is such a radical shift in how they experience sexuality. And most of them, on the whole, are more skeptical at first. They're like, what is this energy bullshit? Also, right now, we've like lost our minds as society. If someone doesn't look exactly like you and isn't your exact gender, or like maybe even your exact age, your same sexual orientation, we're like, that person must hate me. So, like, I really find men are like, this sex switch must hate me. And I'm like, no, I'm devoted to you. I'm devoted to you because I know that you are just as holy and sacred as anybody on this planet. But I'm also devoted to you because I believe in divine femininity and I believe in divine masculinity as well. I also believe in you and am devoted to you because if I love the women of this planet, the vast majority of whom are straight or bisexual, I know that service to them is to get you back into your understanding of yourself as a goddamn warrior because that's what you are. And that's what you were born to be. And I want you in your body and in your primal fuck and knowing how big your heart is and connected back into your body from all the forces that would hijack you into thinking that porn is better than everything you can experience from mystical sexuality. So, yes, for the love of God, men, please do a pleasure practice. It will absolutely change your life.
Well, I'm so glad I asked that question. Talk to us about sex magic, manifestation through sex, all of that. I've heard you get into it, and I'd love for our listeners to hear it too.
Yeah. So one of my favorite practices is sex magic for a variety of different reasons. It is a practice that you can either do solo or with a partner. And the fundamental idea is, as I've been talking about our sexual energy as this kind of life force power, you can use your sexual energy to be an engaged co creator with reality. And when I first started doing sex magic, I went to Stanford University. I've always been like I would go to like psychic school uh, at night, and then I do my like Stanford human biology pre med classes during the day. And I was like, both of these worlds are real. Both of these worlds are true. And when I started doing sex magic and using my orgasm to manifest things, and it was so powerful, I was like, okay, but really, what? like that can't work. So I really thought about it and I was like, why is this so powerful? And I was like, okay, so I'll explain to you why it's so powerful in just a second. But first, for those of you listening who've never done sex magic, I'm just going to do a quick 101 of what it is. So you're either self-pleasuring or you're making love with a partner. And as you're self-pleasuring or making love, you are going to spin your energy through the different chakra bands of the body. So every chakra has a corresponding band inside of the body, and you can swirl the energy through it. So you're making love or you're self-pleasuring, and the energy is swirling first through your root, then it's going to swirl through your second, your third, your fourth, your fifth, your sixth, your seventh, until it gets all the way up to the crown. So your entire body is now filled with your eros, with your sexual life force energy. Now, one of the things that's so powerful about this practice, as I mentioned earlier, one of the things we're doing is chronically leaking our sexual power. This practice pulls your sexual power in and up. It changes that chronic leaking outwards. So when you get to the crown of your head, you come into a state of peak pleasure or orgasm. And from there, you manifest your reality. You actually put yourself into exactly what it is that you want at the moment of peak pleasure or orgasm. The reason that it's so powerful is that most of the time when we are taught manifestation, we're taught to do it either verbally, where we say, I want this, or I have this, or I have that, or to only visualize it. Now, both of those engage a very specific part of the prefrontal cortex that has to do with visualization and futureizing, like visualizing the future, creating the future. This part of us is actually the least powerful when it comes to our unconscious mind, our body, and the deeper parts of our nervous system that are actually imprinted with all of the messaging about what's safe and not safe. So when you do sex magic, instead of just doing it from this superficial part of your mind that likes to visualize about the future, you've brought your whole body on board. Your whole body is active and alive at the moment of manifestation. In the tantric system, activating the chakras is a code for activating your entire brain, your whole nervous system. So at the moment that you manifest, your whole system is listening. This is one of the parts that makes it so incredibly powerful. There's many other parts, but I'll just give you that to let you know one little piece of what makes it so powerful. So in that, you come up with one visualization of what it is that you want more than anything else. And at that moment of peak pleasure, you drop in the manifestation. And this creates an incredible amount of power because you're attuning your entire body, not just one part of your brain, to your vision and what you want. This has a tremendous power of having you choose and magnetize towards that which you want, that which actually gives you what you desire. Whereas most of the time, our nervous system and our unconscious is very coded to fear that which we say we want. So you might have been told that actually money is a source of power, or it's the root of all evil. Or you might say you want partnership, but actually you're terrified of love, right? Or you might say you want business success, but you're terrified of being seen in your power. So sex magic helps you rewire your body so that you can actively desire that, so you can actively seek that which you desire. So it's incredibly powerful. It's also one of the most fun practices ever. So I love doing sex magic every single full moon at least. And if I can, almost every day by myself, but every week with my partner. It's one of my absolute favorite practices.
What does a healthy practice with your partner look like? How often are people having sex? And yeah, what do you
Yeah,
recommend?
totally. So I think when it comes to having a deeper sacred sexuality practice, right? Like my methodology is called the VITA Method. And so when it comes to doing something like a VITA date night, right? Where you're going to like set up the candles and put the faux fur blanket down and like play the whole playlist. And you're going to do a whole process, right? Because like a whole date night from start to finish is like you could fast track it in an hour, but you probably want a minimum of 2 hours. And like it could be 3. Realistically, for a modern couple, once a month, right, to actually do that. If you've got kids, to get a babysitter, if you've got busy careers, to carve out that time. But nobody ever regrets doing that, right? Like our relationship and the quality of our relationship is one of the single most important determinants of our happiness across our entire life. Not having a relationship, but the quality of your relationship, right? And so that is so, so, so important. I'd say if you're really on it and you want to make this, like, this is who we are, this is what we do, once a week. Like, that's what me and my partner try and do is like one deeper date night once a week. And then there's lots of shorter practices. So the other thing too is some people tend to think, oh, I'm going to start like a sacred sexuality practice. Like all of a sudden now I have to have sex all the time. And that just feels like a whole, like a whole bunch of things on the to-do list that I don't need on my to-do list right now. One thing that I think calms a lot of women's nervous system specifically is that there's a lot of connection exercises, teachings around gratitude, teachings around, I have a morning ritual that I'll have couples do every single morning that's just 5 minutes long, but it connects you and orients you and drops you in energetically and has you connect to gratitude together, right? So let's say you have some big sexy date night once a once in a blue moon, once a month kind of thing, right? And maybe you have any kind of sex date night once a week, but you're doing these energetic practices, even breath work practices together, connection exercises together almost every day, because that kind of intimacy is also what creates desire. Desire lives both in the taboo and the separation and the like, yeah, and the kind of playing with the naughtiness of life, which I teach as well, but it also unlocks from the intimacy. So I like for couples to have both. And so it's like every day you have an intimacy practice, but more sporadically you have an actual sex practice.
I feel like that would be such a good light work, but I'll let you choose the light work. There was probably also several, but yeah, light work is something we like to gift listeners, something that they can take away from the conversation and give to themselves so that they can shine their lights a little brighter. So we'd love to know what your light work is.
Beautiful. So I will give a guided practice right now. And then also for anyone who's interested, I have all of these guided practices for free on my website. So you can get a sex magic download. You can get an orgasmic breathwork download that actually guides you through the practice step by step. So if you're ready, engaging in that kind of light work is highly recommended. And a most basic pleasure practice, and I love that you call it light work, would be 10 minutes. So get yourself a sexy playlist. We also share sexy playlists a lot. It's one of our most requested
I love that.
pieces. So you can get on my email list over on my website. We send out sexy playlists all the time. So you put on a 10-minute sexy playlist, right? You're going to want coconut oil or lube or something that feels luscious on your body. And you're going to drop in, and drop in means feel your body, start to shift out of your head into the sensations of your body, and do a deeper, fuller breath than usual. So you're going to want to breathe as though you could breathe into your pussy. So breathing in and out of pussy, in and out of pussy. You're going to start to touch yourself all over your body. And the key to this pleasure practice, as we talked about earlier, is whatever comes up, any emotion, any experience, you're going to breathe into it. You're going to understand what it is, why it's there. And then you're going to breathe underneath it and meet the part that wants to become whole in you again. So in the pleasure practice, you're breathing into your pussy, you're starting to self pleasure, and Instead of just going into a fantasy or maybe the normal way that you touch yourself, you're going to wait if you do go into peak pleasure or your body does want to have an orgasmic experience until the end of the 10 minutes. So you're going to just drop into what it is to pleasure yourself, drop into what it is to feel your whole body, drop into what it is to connect to your sexual energy and to feel that much more deeply and to keep breathing in and out of your pussy. What the breath work will do is it will take you out of thinking about your sexuality into the immediate experience of your sexuality. This will also bring certain elements up. So, like we talked about, Danielle, at the beginning of if there's shame, if there's sadness, if there's something that's been blocking you, it will come up in the pleasure practice. So you breathe with it, you allow it to release, you love it, and it will move through you. And more underlying pieces will be restored. And then at the end of that 10 minutes, if you feel like going into peak pleasure or orgasm, you can. But you'll notice that your experience of orgasm and your experience of pleasure will shift just from taking the time to do the deeper breath work, to really tune into the sensations of your body, and to give your body the space to feel what it wants to feel instead of only pushing it towards climax. That alone opens you up to feel so much more during sex.
Some awesome light work.
Yeah.
Do it, everyone. Layla, thank you so much for joining us today. It was such a powerful episode, and thank you for all the work that you do in the world.
Oh, you're welcome. It's been such a joy to be here.